guys, today we are going to review one of the icons of military history. This is really probably one of the most famous weapons ever made, one of the most successful designs of the 20th century, the most desirable weapons platform you can find pretty much anywhere. This is the Uzi submachine gun. So the Uzi submachine gun was designed in the early 1950s by Uzi Uzi was born in Weimar, Germany, and escaped to Palestine before the State of Israel was founded. That was at the time of the British Mandate. And he was actually arrested and jailed by the British for weapons possession. Guns were very heavily regulated at the time in mandatory Palestine, as they are today in the State of Israel. And if you were caught with a firearm without permission, you were going to jail. So he was actually jailed for weapons possession. And then when the State of Israel was founded, he went into weapons design. The early State of Israel was really lacking in effective combat weapons. They had a mishmash of pretty much everything you can imagine. World War I and World War II era European and American weapons. A lot of British weapons that were left over from the time of the British Mandate. They had a whole bunch of German rifles that were given by Czechoslovakia, 98Ks, and then they had a lot of Stens, submachine guns, some of which were made by the British and left over during the time of the Mandate, or were captured by Israeli or Jewish pre-state undergrounds, which would have been the Palmach, the Haganah, the Irgun Tzvai Leumi, also known as the Irgun, or the Lehi, also known as the Stern Gang. A lot of those organizations were raiding British depots and stealing guns. And then the Israelis actually made their own unlicensed copy of the Sten. They actually, there's a really long and interesting story about how that came about. They borrowed a Sten from a British soldier, and they basically copied it. They took it apart and copied it, and they started manufacturing it on their own in underground factories, even before the State of Israel existed. And so, at the beginning of the State of Israel, the first couple of years, don't forget, there's a war going on. There's a war of independence. 1948, 1949, the Arab armies invade. They don't manage to destroy the country, but there's constant warfare. And they're desperate, and they need good weapons to defend themselves. And so those Stens were pretty unreliable, and the Israeli government decided to commission some weapons designers to create a new submachine gun, which would meet their specifications. They wanted something which was going to be, first of all, rugged and reliable, but also accurate and relatively affordable for mass production. And they found Uzi and there was actually a competition between him and another designer. And his design, which was actually based somewhat on an earlier Czech design, won the competition. And that was this. That was the Uzi submachine gun. Ironically, he did not want this gun being named after him. He's like, name it after anything you want. Call it whatever you want, but don't call this after me. And guess what they did? They went ahead and they called it the Uzi. They did exactly what he didn't want. But it turned out that this was an unbelievably successful design. This weapon met all of their requirements, all of their specifications. This weapon was rugged. It was accurate. It was reliable. It was easy to maintain in the field. And believe me, in the Middle Eastern environment, that is very important, that you have a weapon that is easy to maintain in the field, because you have a lot of dust and grit and grime and other things like that. And this weapon really did offer that. And it was also not extremely expensive to mass produce. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't, like some of the later submachine guns like the MP5s. Those were very expensive to produce. This was a little bit cheaper. So it really met the needs of the State of Israel at the time. And it was already in use by the time of Israel's first major war since the War of Independence, which was the Sinai Campaign in 1956. This was already standard issue by that time. And don't forget, the original Uzis did not have the folding stock. the original Uzis had a fixed wooden stock. Now, to be honest with you, that stock is a lot more comfortable to shoot because you got your cheek weld. You don't have a piece of kind of sharp metal jutting into your cheek, so it's a little bit more comfortable to shoot. But it's not very convenient having that big long stock, especially on a submachine gun, which you want the submachine gun to be compact, and that took away from its compactness. So that was the first generation of Uzis, had the fixed stock. And then later, by the 1960s, they had designed the folding stock. So this was actually originally designed for paratroopers, tzanchanim as they say in Hebrew, which collapses really nicely and makes the weapon very, very small. Really, really small. And then just to open it, you give it a tap like that, and it locks open. And so this went into production by the early 60s, and it was liked so much that it went beyond just the paratroopers. All the units of the IDF that could get their hands on these did, because it's just so much more convenient to have that folding stock. Even though the wooden stocks stayed in service all the way until the point when the Uzi was phased out in 2004, those wooden stocks were still in service all the way to the end. Because those Uzis worked very well. Wasn't a bad design. So, by the time of Israel's next war, which was the Six-Day War, in 1967, this weapon in this configuration was alongside the FN FAL, which was Israel's main battle rifle at the time. It was a standard issue weapon. Pretty much every unit in the IDF, every combat unit, was issued with many, many Uzis. And these had a lot of success. They were very successful back in the Sinai campaign, 1956, in the desert, in the Sinai with the grit. And then they were even more successful in the Six-Day War when they were engaged in combat in the Sinai against Egypt, in the Golan Heights against Syria, and they were also engaged in combat in Jerusalem and what's known as the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, against the Jordanians. And there's a lot of famous footage and photos of the Uzi being used in the Israeli paratroopers' capture of the Old City of Jerusalem. They were armed with Uzis when they were storming the Old City. They were up against the Jordanian Legion, which was a very well-trained and well-armed unit, probably the best Arab fighting unit that existed at the time, and they were able to storm the Old City using primarily Uzis. The FAL is a good rifle, but it was not great for urban warfare. This was much more effective in the close confines of the Old City. So this is just really, it became really iconic, in that time period, in the Six-Day War. And it continued in service into the 1973 Yom Kippur War, and even into Lebanon in 1982 and beyond. But by that time, by the time of the Yom Kippur War in 1973, assault rifles were really becoming more prevalent as main battle weapons, simply because they had greater range and greater stopping power. So that's when Israel started to design and adopt the Galil, and then the U.S. started sending M16s. They had also captured a massive quantity of AK-47s, Kalashnikovs, from the Arab armies, and they were putting those in service too. So the Uzi, by the 1970s, stopped being a main frontline weapon for infantry troops, but it was still used very, very extensively as a special forces weapon. All of Israel's special forces units, the Sayeret Matkal, which is Israel's most advanced commando unit, as well as the Shayetet Shloshisve, the Flotilla 13, which is Israel's Navy SEALs, continued using the Uzi for special ops, for commando raids, close quarter operations. The Uzi continued in service all the way through the 1980s. By the 90s, a lot of those units were upgrading to newer versions of the Uzi, specifically the Mini Uzi and the Micro Uzi, which were a little bit smaller. But a lot of operators that had the option of one or the other would actually go with the original full-size Uzi because it was easier to maintain, easier to control, and it was just more reliable. And this is from a lot of first-hand information that I'm getting from people who use those. The Uzi also saw service extensively in the Israeli police. It saw service, continued to see service in the IDF, in second-line units, support units, female soldiers, and then specifically in the settlements in the West Bank and Gaza. So I remember very clearly they were issuing Uzis to a lot of the security teams, what we call Kitot Konenut, armed response teams made up of civilian volunteers from the settlements. They were issuing these to guards, to volunteers, and then even also at the time, the IDF was issuing weapons to individual civilians, to what were known as settlers, because it was a very dangerous place to live in. It still is. At the time, the ideas of gun control had not really permeated society to the extent that they have now in Israel, and so they did feel safe issuing military weapons such as Uzis and M16s to civilians, and so a lot of civilians were carrying issued Uzis around the settlements. If you would have gone in the 80s and 90s, walked around any of those settlements in the West Bank, kind of like where I grew up, Kiryat Arba, which is next to Hebron, you would have seen, it would have been totally normal to see people, civilians, carrying Uzis, just walking around everywhere. Of course, that's not the case anymore, but that was pretty normal at the time. The Uzi has also been used by many, many other countries. The Uzi has become extremely successful in South America, in Africa, and in a lot of countries in Europe. West Germany, the Netherlands, a lot of nations have adopted this gun. It was also very heavily used in Rhodesia, in the conflict in the 1970s between the Rhodesian government and communist terrorist forces. They used this heavily, and it really gained notoriety around the world as a very, very effective submachine gun. It is, by the way, still in use in a lot of those countries. If you go to those countries in South America, to Colombia, to Peru, to a lot of those places, they still have the Uzi in service. It is still a frontline weapon, and they have no plans to phase this out. This is something which is very, very effective. It even saw service in U.S. forces. The United States bought a number of these for special operations in Vietnam, and they were used there very successfully. Famously, this weapon was adopted by the U.S. Secret Service, and when there was an assassination attempt made on the life of Ronald Reagan, there's some famous footage of Secret Service agents whipping one of these out of a briefcase, popping open the stock. Of course, that one had a little bit of a stubby barrel, a little bit of a shortened barrel to fit in that briefcase by that agent in a double-breasted suit protecting the president after he was shot. So we'll talk about how we sling it real quick. So the way this is an original IDF sling. So it's got the little pad over here. So we're going to want to sling the weapon over our neck like this with the stock open. All right. Now the way we want to carry the weapon is with the bolt closed. You never want to carry the weapon with the bolt open. It is very, very dangerous to do that because if at any point, you pull the trigger, well, bam. So we want to always keep the weapon slung, muzzle down, bolt closed, and then of course, keep a loaded magazine in there. So this is really combat carry. Of course, if you're about to engage an opponent, then at that point, you cock back the bolt. But otherwise, you're going to want to keep the bolt closed, the weapon on either semi or full auto, depending on what you're going to want to do. And again, muzzle down. So this is combat carry for the weapon. If at any point you are not in a position where you think you're going to have to engage an immediate threat, you can sling it around your shoulder as such, and the weapon is out of your way like this. So this is called cross carry, in Hebrew hatzlev, okay? And then this, again, combat carry in Hebrew, this is called tletzavar, net carry. So those are the ways that you'll want to carry your weapon. Remember, if you are ready with the weapon, you want to make sure that the stock is always open. The stock can be closed if you're just slinging it, cross carry around your shoulder. If you're not in any particular danger, you just need to get the weapon out of the way, that's fine. But at any time you are in a position where you think you might need to use the weapon, remember to keep it open at all times. So how does this work? So again, this is a submachine gun that fires from an open bolt. So what does that mean? That means the bolt is open. As you can see, it's open in order to be ready to fire. And when you fire, what happens? Watch what happens when I pull the trigger. The bolt goes forward and fires the bullet and then flies back in order to chamber the next round. So the reason for this is to avoid having bullets cook off in the barrel, because this is a submachine gun. It does have a very high rate of fire, and if you have bullets sitting in the barrel, there is the potential for rounds to start cooking off, and that is extremely dangerous. So that's why probably the majority of fully automatic weapons, not all, but the majority do fire from an open bolt. So this shoots from an open bolt. It does take a little bit of practice to get used to shooting from an open bolt. It is quite different from a closed bolt. So again, that's your charging handle. Now over here on this side, this here is the selector switch. So on a semi-auto Uzi, you're only going to have two options here. You're going to have the S, which is safe, and you're going to have over here will be an F for fire. In this case, you have three options. All right, you have safe, which is S, R, which is repeat, and then you got A, which is automatic. You guessed it. Now this one here, this is from an actual military submachine gun. So you'll notice over here, it's got Hebrew letters. So there is Nun Sadeh, which stands for Natsu, which means in Hebrew, safe. The next one on the selector switch is going to be the Hebrew letter Bet, which stands for Bodedet, which means semi-automatic. And the third is Aleph, which stands for Automat. Well, you can guess what that means. So, again, if it has the Hebrew letters, it was probably an Israeli military issue weapon. If it's all in English, it was probably an IMI export. And that's why we've got everything here in English. But it works exactly the same way. The parts are exactly the same, interchangeable, etc. Another thing you'll notice, difference between one of the original military weapons and a civilian version is that the coating generally on the exported versions is going to be black, whereas the military issue ones from the IDF had a matte gray finish. Of course, a lot of people have changed the finish on their weapon, refinished them, but that's one of the things that you will notice in terms of these weapons over here. So one thing to note on the Uzi, you do have, kind of like on a 1911, you have a grip safety. So this is another feature in order to avoid the weapon going off unintentionally. There were the original versions of the Uzi were plagued with problems like this. If you locked back the bolt and dropped it, it could start firing. And imagine a submachine gun jumping around the room, peppering everything. That wouldn't be too much fun, would it now? So you do have this grip safety, and you can't really do anything with the weapon unless you're engaging the grip safety. So you got to hold it down. While you are cocking the weapon, while you're firing, you won't be able to do anything without it. So just remember, always keep that grip safety down. Now, the magazine release is down here. Okay, it's not where your thumb would be like on a pistol, like on a Glock or a SIG or something. It is down here. So it's designed for, this is really designed for righties. So you basically be reaching around with your left hand to take out the magazine. So magazine would go in like this, and then to take it out, you'd be reaching over here and pulling it out, engaging the magazine release. If you're a lefty, oh well. Now, once again, we got our folding stock over here. If you're shooting it, stock should always be open. We have our hand guard over here, which on the original Uzi is a lot bigger than on the mini Uzi. The mini Uzi has a really tiny little hand guard, and that's one of the complaints a lot of people have. And the micro Uzi doesn't have a hand guard at all, so you got nothing to grab onto. So when you're holding a micro Uzi, you got to hold it like that, which is not very comfortable. So I like this nice big hand guard over here. You got your front sight, you got your rear sight. They are very well protected by some really solid steel sight protectors on both sides here. So if you throw the gun around, it's not going to knock your sights at a zero. The rear sight can be zeroed either to the 100 or to the 200 meters. I would say on a submachine gun, 200 meters is being very optimistic, but 100 definitely, you can definitely do that. and the sights, of course, are adjustable, unlike on the Sten. That was a major complaint. To disassemble this, and this is one of the best parts of the Uzi, it is just so easy to disassemble. Unlike a lot of other guns, field stripping on this is really idiot-proof. So first thing you want to do, push down on that, and then you're going to unscrew the barrel nut and take out your barrel. Alright? That's number one. Now we want to make sure our bolt's forward. And we're going to pop off our dust cover. Now this is where we're taking out the bolt. There's the bolt. And there is our spring. Presto. The weapon is disassembled. It's that easy. And then to put it back is just, the reverse operation. You can put in your spring over here. That goes in there. Drop your barrel in. Replace the barrel nut. There you go. It is just so easy to maintain in the field, and that's one reason why soldiers and commanders alike love this weapon. It's just so simple, so easy to maintain, very, very easy to disassemble. It actually does have a little bayonet lug here. Not a lot of people realize what that even is. Believe it or not, it was issued standard with a bayonet lug. And there were some Uzi bayonets that were manufactured. You can see them popping up once in a while at gun shows and auctions and even on eBay. But they were never actually issued in combat. You really wouldn't want to mount a bayonet on a weapon this small. Submachine guns and bayonets don't really go together very well. But they sure do make for good collectibles. Now, in terms of the magazines, the standard issue magazines on the Uzis were these here 25 round magazines, and they are really cool in that they were designed, these were very early designs with witness holes. They have the witness holes for the 10, the 15, the 20, and the 25 rounds. So you can tell exactly how many rounds, well maybe not exactly, but pretty much how many rounds are in the gun just by looking through these holes. And at the time when this was designed in the 50s, that wasn't that common. So this was a really cool advancement in terms of the design. And then of course the mil-spec magazines have a little star, that's a proof mark from the IDF. So if your magazine has that proof mark, you'll know that, that this was an actual IDF issue magazine. Now the way that most soldiers would be issued this is they would have what is called a tsolevet. So this is, it is a coupler. So what you'll see is you got two 25 round magazines sitting right next to each other. So what that does, that gives you, double the firepower. So what you can do when you got one in here, so you fire that, and when you're out, you just switch to your second one. You don't have to go looking in your duty belt or in your web gear for a secondary magazine. So it's right there. It's a really amazing design. I really love these couplers. Now another thing this gives you is when you're shooting it, at least with the first one, it gives you a 5th point of contact. So remember, in the Israeli shooting doctrine, we have 5 points of contact, and one of them is the forearm on the magazine, and this gives you that 5th point of contact. Now of course, with your second magazine, you don't have that point of contact, but at least on the first one, you do, which is really nifty. So this is how the soldiers were issued this weapon, with the coupler, and then of course they would have more magazines with them on a duty belt. So those are the 25 rounders. Now, a little later on, they designed these 32 rounders. These are 32 round magazines. These are higher capacity. These were not standard issue among infantry forces. These were issued mainly to special forces, soldiers and commandos and the special police forces, etc. So they're not as common as the others, but they do give you a higher capacity. So that is really cool. 32 rounds. It's really nice, especially if you're firing on full auto. That is really cool. One thing to note, this weapon was designed for heavier hitting 9mm ammo. So generally it will shoot most of your common ammo that you'll find pretty much anywhere, your 115 grain, but it was really designed for, well, this is an actual Israeli issue ammo. I got a couple of boxes of this stuff here. Submachine gun ammo. So what this is 124 grain, and it's also got hardened primers. because this was designed to be shot with ammo with hardened primers. If you don't use ammunition with hardened primers, 124 grain, you might end up with jams. It is entirely possible. But if you use this kind of ammo, it doesn't have to be actual IDF issue ammo. Pretty much anything that is 124 grain with a hardened primer, you should be, shooting flawlessly. Another thing, this gun is not finicky. You can use cheap steel case Russian ammo on this, pretty much anything you want. It'll just keep going and going and going. The rate of fire on this is a little low as some machine guns go. It is 600 rounds per minute, so that's not so high. If you want to increase the rate of fire, it's pretty easy. So you got this little buffer right here. This is very cheap and very easy. Basically just a very little piece of plastic. And all you got to do is you insert that. You're gonna basically field strip the weapon, and you're gonna insert that right over here, right behind the bolt. Okay, so you wanna put your spring going right through here, so that it basically gives you a buffer. All right, it gives you a buffer between the bolt and the end of the gun. So what that does, that shortens the length to which the bolt has to cycle back each time the weapon is fired. And then what that does is that's going to give you a higher rate of fire. So I just inserted that in there. Very, very simple. So that's going to take up your rate of fire from 600 rounds a minute to anywhere from 700 all the way up to potentially 900 rounds per minute, depending on the thickness of your buffer. If you have a thinner buffer, it's not going to bring it up that high. A really thick buffer will bring up the RPM pretty high, but at a certain point, it's just not going to work anymore. So you got to choose carefully the thickness of your buffer. Overall, this is really an awesome gun. I really love the Uzi. The Uzi is just iconic. It is probably one of the best weapons ever made, in my opinion. Listen, guys, I'm in love with this thing. This is just an awesome weapon. Let's hit the range. Let's try this out. Okay, well, that was fun. Now let's give this baby a shot in full auto. Man, that is nice. That is nice. Let me go with one of the 32 rounders. That should be even more fun. Let's see how that goes. Woo! Let's try the Tolevet. We're going to try the coupler. See how that one goes. Woo! That is nice. That is nice. But you know what? That rate of fire, that ain't too fast. So what we're gonna do now, we're gonna bring up the rate of fire. We're gonna put in that spacer. Now we've got the spacer in there to bring up the rate of fire. Woo! Woo! That was a lot faster. That's more fun. That's what I call fast shooting. Let's see here. All right, we'll go with another one. I'm going to advance on the target. See how we do. I'm going to move forward. Uzi does it. Man, that was a lot of fun. Hope you liked that as much as I did. There is really nothing like an Uzi. You know, they say Uzi does it. They say that for a reason. Uzi does it. Hey guys, if you want to get an Uzi, you are going to have a hard time, but if you want to come train on one, you can come join me for a tactical Uzi submachine gun course anytime. Anyhow, hope you like this video. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.